Thank you, Valish. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Vivek and Aditya. Welcome to BAM Bengaluru. So what is technical agility and business agility? And they do have a strong relationship. I don't think any of us deny that there is a strong relationship. But how do they relate actually? So when you look at today, we see two types of organizations, right? Broadly, I mean, there are many, many types, but two broadly that comes to my mind when I talk about these two topics. One that are very adapting to change, right? They adapt to changes, market and customer expectations as quickly as possible. They innovate the space also so that others can join them and they thrive in that space. And there is a second type who struggle to sustain their existence as their products lack the market and customer expectations. This struggle is mainly because maybe the products are very legacy, they are unable to adapt to the newer technology, they are unable to decode what the customer or the market expectations are. Many reasons that can come to the picture here. So which essentially means that product lacks technical agility that is unable to impress the customer or the market, and hence the business agility of the organization also suffers. So today we have two experts from the different spaces, from the service and the product background, who are going to be precisely talking to us on the correlation between the two, the differences between the two, and how they complement, align, and converge with each other to provide the best possible scenario for an organization. And I welcome Vivek and Aditya for the July edition of Business Agility Meetup Bengaluru. Welcome Vivek, welcome Aditya. So I was trying to think, how do I introduce both of them? And usually in any panel discussion, we go by alphabetical order. Then I realized that Aditya will always be the first and Vivek will always be the last in this. So today I just decided to break the rule. So hope it's okay with you, Vivek and Aditya. I'm going to go in the reversal alphabetical order. So yeah, it's still a rule. Yeah, it's okay to break rules, right? That's what I read this one also. Shuhari also says, break the rules once you have learned it, so you can see what other innovations you can do. So welcome Vivek, welcome Aditya. Vivek Ganesan, he is not new to us. He has been very, very generous in sharing his knowledge and experience at BAM Bengaluru. He has even done a workshop in the past, but still, I will introduce him for a lot of people who are new on this today's session. Vivek Ganesan is the author of two books. I'm co-founder of Ampiad. He's also an agile DevOps consultant and helps organizations, teams, and individuals to be better and happier from where they are right now. Vivek has worked with different types of organizations as a part of his consulting career. This includes startups and Fortune 50 organizations. His company Ampiad recently launched NoteSally, a SaaS software to make life easy for sales professionals. Exactly right. What else products are expected to do? They're supposed to make our life easy. So Vivek is a hands-on coder who contributes to open source software in his free time, which he's pretty passionate about. Welcome Vivek to the session.
Thank you.
Aditya SP comes with 17 years of experience. He heads the technology at Arita Consulting right now, working with clients and helping them build software solutions and modern architecture and scalable solutions. Aditya started his career with Infosys, working on building software, moved on to Oracle, building huge trading systems, dealing with institutional investments. Then moved to FICCI. He has worked with products teams, building organization products, which interacted data analytics products and models to upsell and cross-sell the products. Most recently, he has worked on data-enabled products. He finds interest in working with applications as his profile reads. You can see that he finds interest in working with applications and products, especially that use ML and AI to make decisions, which is very much the new age technology that we are going to be talking about. So over to you, Vivek, to kick off the session, and then we will move to Aditya, and then we will have a very interesting question answer sessions. And all of you are welcome to ask questions in the chat window. I will facilitate your questions with our speakers. So looking forward to a very interacting session. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you very much, Padma. Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you all in this nice morning. And today we are going to talk about how technical agility fueled business agility and many other things also in the product that we are right now working on, which is called NoteSally. It's a SaaS product. And I hope to share some of my experiences and some key principles which we charted when we started our journey, even before we wrote the first line of code, and hope it will be useful for all of you. So this is going to be based on my own experience. So I'm going to share you 5 key principles that we used, and also some stories around that, and probably some reasoning behind that. So think of this as something that you can take back along with some experiences also, right? So just before I go further, is everything okay? My screen sharing, audio, video, everything is okay? Padma and Valish?
Perfect, Vivek, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is what we are going to do. So at this point in time, where we are, NoteSLI is the software that we are working on, and the journey is this, right? Though people try to put arrows in between these boxes, we initially did market research and did interviews, and then did more market research, did more interviews after we had to find out a lot of things. So deciding on which product to work on took a lot of time for us. Not a huge time, but it's considerable amount of time. And then we had to, once we took a lot of interviews from people, we decided, okay, fine, we will do a product that will help salespeople more, to save time. Now there are a lot of technological advances that have happened recently, and we could use that in order to help salespeople. Now once the interviews are done, we went into product ideation, and again, if you see the product ideation, in the process also we went and did some more interviews. So though it looks linear, the actual thing that we did is far from being linear, right? And then once we have a product idea sort of created and sorted out, then we wanted to do a minimum viable product, right? It's a term popularized by lean startup, and we did a linear minimum viable product, which is the minimum absolute number of things that you can put in the software so that people could start actually get benefit from it. That's the idea. So we created MVP, we had our own development cycles, and after that we launched our product on the market. So we did a product hunt launch, and we launched on different platforms. Right now, a lot of platforms have listed our software as a sales enablement software, and all these things are happening. And where we are right now is not any of these places. We are in the point where we want to change based on feedback. So right now we have trial users on board onto our platform, and people are trying out, and we are getting a lot of feedback. We are in this space where we have to change not just the software, not just the product, but also the business aspect of it. For example, what are our billing cycles? How are our billing cycles going to be? How our subscription is going to work? For example, if some person subscribes to our software, is it going to be monthly or yearly? And in case a person wants to cancel in between the month, what is supposed to happen? Right? And sometimes, okay, how is the onboarding going to be? Am I going to onboard and then charge, or charge and then onboard? Right? These kind of actual business, which changes the financial equations in the company, are also up for discussion, and they also have to change. So it's not just the SaaS product, it's not just the technology, it's not just new features. These features have an impact on how we are going to interact with our customers, and how we position ourselves as a business. Some things are very strategic, right? Do you have a product which do you go with a marketing plan where you target the enterprise customers, or do you have a marketing plan which targets SMBs first? And the answer to this question will change the way our website is presented to the users, the landing pages are presented to the users, and our software, how the product demo videos that we are doing are presented to the users. And these are a lot of things that we are juggling with on our day-to-day basis, and we change very fast, right? And every day we change at least one or two parts of not just our product but also our website in order to be relevant, right? And another areas where changes are very important to us is the regulation part, right? If suddenly we decide, okay, fine, we need to be able to target a European customer, and somebody comes and says, hey, we are a European customer for you, and we want you to see if you're GDPR compliant. Though GDPR compliance is a part of our initial onboarding, still we have to be able to prove that we are GDPR compliant to people, and that creates a lot of changes that we need to do. So what I am trying to say here is that the changes that we face today at this point, where we are rapidly changing based on feedback, it's not just about our technology, it is about business. And when we have to change the way we do business, when we have to change our billing cycles, when we have to change our target market, all these changes should be possible, or are possible, only when we change our product and website very fast, right? If we are not able to do that, then we will not be able to move fast and, take all opportunities that come to us. So in light of that, what we did, I'm going to share some of the key principles, right? 5 key principles which are very technical in nature, which we followed, which will help us to move faster whenever a business change happens. So I'm going to just tell you these 5 principles and probably share some anecdotes around that. So the very first principle, right, is that the offline development is the norm, right? Nowadays, a lot of technology tools and a lot of things are there. There are people who have IDEs on cloud and they develop only on cloud. One decision which we took very early on, even before the first line of code was written, is that offline development is the norm, and any developer should be able to, run and develop write code for our software in his laptop, even when he sits in a remote location, right? Only when it is impossible, for example, integration with other systems, right? And we try to mock them also, but there are sometimes where mocking is also not very possible. Only in those cases the coder should be actually connecting to the internet in order to develop, and this has huge benefits for us. First benefit, very often very easy, is the cost, because we don't have to, be reliant on cloud platforms or integrations in order to make the development work done. Of course, for the running of the software you need integrations, but and second thing is, right now we have people working from 4 states, and there is one person from Gujarat, and there is always a possibility, even in cities like Bangalore, where you do not have a proper internet connection, and your work should not be right. It should not stop because internet connection is not there, and everything, if you are able to run in your local development platform, local laptop, right, which means the memory footprint should be less and the performance should be high, and a lot of things. The people should not waste a lot of time in order to, just develop a small feature. This has a lot of implication to the speed at which we develop, right? But still we test everything on cloud, but development work predominantly happens locally, with a specific local setup without internet connection. And this is a very interesting point, which has led to our speed also and cost reduction also, vis-a-vis, right? And the second principle that we are using is, anyone can test any code anytime on cloud. So any person in our team, right, can test any part of our software on cloud in our testing environment, and it should not take more than 5 minutes. For example, we have multiple branches, right? So any branch can be deployed to an environment. An environment can be created very quickly, where a person can test it, and it should not take 5 minutes from the intention to test and the actual starting of testing. And this also again makes our testing cycles faster. Second thing, if you want to try and experiment something, it's very quick. The transaction costs are very low, right? And we use a lot of technologies in order to make this possible. For example, serverless. Most of our APIs are based on serverless, right? And serverless technologies give you this flexibility, and they can scale seamlessly, and it's very easy to spin up serverless, and all our UI is on, we basically build our UI. We have a lot of scripts even for our UI to quickly deploy them to an environment where you can test, right? So it's very easy, intentional. We don't think about it as an afterthought. Intentionally, from day one, we started with, anybody can test any code within 5 minutes if they want to test. They should not think about, okay, this branch is in that environment, that branch is in this environment. That kind of discussions don't happen. And the third principle is, test environment on our cloud is equal to product and prod environment on cloud. We do not change anything except the data and the connection metadata, right? The RAM size or the configurations, multiple things are going to be the exact same. Only the data is going to change between test environment and prod environment, which means if it works in test and the DB connections are data is correct, DB connection details are correct, it's going to work in prod, because we have the exact same setup between test and our prod. And this is also an important thing, because even after testing on our testing environment, if people tend to have doubts, then again it's going to be like, okay, just to be sure, before we actually release something to customer, we are going to delay, right? And the confidence level increases after test, and after deploying on prod, there is a smoke test, right? That way, people deploy to prod with high confidence. And also, it is a non-event many times because we are taking very small changes and putting on prod using, of course, there is a script that basically deploys from our code to prod whenever there is, any deployment required. Those things are there. But what we want to attack in this point is that environment parity, right? We do not take a scaled down version of production and call it test. Our test environment has the same capability, same production power when compared to prod, and this does not need a lot of investment. Nowadays, again, with the serverless technology, it is possible that you can have the exact same setup for test like you are having on prod. And the fourth point is about database changes. The database, particularly when you are in the phase where you're rapidly changing, initial product market fit kind of a validation, your data model changes obscenely changes, and a lot of things change. And what we want to do is we want to be able to take travel back in time if needed and create a very similar database as we had on so and so specific data. Of course, the data will be different, but at least the data schema, right? And this has improved our ability. For example, we use a software called Liquibase, which is now the de facto norm for multiple SaaS softwares. Liquibase, where all our database changes also go along with code into our Git, right? So our source code repository will tell you both the code changes and the database changes, and in some instances it will also tell about any environment configuration changes also. So code, configuration, and data, all these three things go into Git, and that is our single source of truth. We don't have multiple sources of truth, and this also helps us in keeping knowledge same across multiple people and quickly able to produce an environment out of a specific point in time and run it on cloud to see whether we are able to reproduce a bug, or we want to change some things from that point, and so that we can create a development version from there. All these things we have been able to do, right? And the last point I will leave you at, this last point, is that we always collect product usage data. For example, we create a feature, we always think about, okay, we are going to add a button, do we need to collect metrics from that button to see whether we are going in the right direction? Because at this stage we are in, we are validating whether our product is fit for the market or not. At that time, we have to collect metrics to see how people are using our software and change accordingly, right? For that, we need metrics which are going to enter into our dashboards as sometimes leading and lagging indicators, which will decide the direction that we take in our product. So what we do is, we do not think about product usage metrics as an afterthought. We do not say, okay, fine, oh, now that we have developed our feature, okay, what all things will be useful? Just when we start coding our first line of the code for a feature, we think about all NFRs are there. NFRs are non-functional requirements. We think of NFR metrics as a non-functional requirements. What should go into our dashboard because we are putting this feature? If nothing affects in our dashboard, then why are we putting it as a feature? This question gets asked very often number of times. And we have our own metrics collection ecosystem, and we have our own tools that support. For example, Google Analytics does a lot of work for our metrics collection, right? And for production log collection, we have our own tools which are given by AWS, and a lot of other things are there in order to make sure that this is possible, right? And because of these 5 key principles, there are other principles also, but these are the 5 top principles which help us to change as and when we want the business to change and not become a roadblock. We don't want technology or the product to be a roadblock for the business to change. And these are the 5 things that has helped us. And this is all I had to share with you. And thank you very much. Only I'll go back and stop sharing.
Thanks, Vivek. Thank you. Aditya, over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Vivek. Those were nice. Padma, thank you. Let me start sharing my screen. Yep. So is it visible? Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see the first slide. Yes.
Yeah. So continuing on this topic of technical agility fueling business agility.
Aditya, I'm not sure if it's for me, but your voice is a little breaking.
Breaking, is it? Let me see.
It's for me. I don't know if it's for others as well. Maybe
so
it's my connection.
Stopping this video.
Can someone else confirm?
Bandwidth? Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I got a couple of them. It says it's clear. All right. Okay. So let me start off. Continuing on this topic from technical agility fueling business agility, and I want to bring in the services angle to it, wherein so when it's a technology company which is servicing another business, another technology, there are many different combinations of what those arrangements can be. But to achieve this technical agility, at least there are two ways of making it possible. One is building a configurable software, which basically tells you what can be turned on, what can be turned off, and what other things can really help them align themselves with the business needs. Right? So the other thing is about achieving greater control through release management process. So today I have taken this topic of how we can really address those needs, especially in a services engagement. Right? So on that, I first want to draw out a few differences between what does it mean when we try to bring in technical agility in product teams versus services teams, right? So here, if we broadly classify the teams as the business and the technology team, in a product team, the mission and vision are greatly aligned. So everybody are really tuned towards what they want to achieve as a company, as a product. So a parallel that I can draw is it's like having your own driver and having your own team, you using that car or any vehicle for that matter, right? For the lifetime. And on the services side, it just becomes that a business hails a taxi and then reaches some destination, right? And that's very transactional. So coming to these points, so on a comparison like this, the empathy levels throughout a product companies, a product teams within company, and a services engagement. At a product team, it's familial, so it's like one whole large family moving towards a certain goal. But on the services side, it is symbiotic. The services company needs businesses to keep its light burning, and the businesses have their strategic needs, so they want this services company to help them reach those strategic needs. So that is one more thing. And then the view of the end user. So most of the times in a product company, it is very easy to acquire an end user vision for the whole team. So you exactly know who might be your end user and how are you trying to align your product towards the end user. But with the services thing, so you have a client in between and the client has another end user. So you try to align with the client's needs or the end user's needs. And then that always becomes a point of contention there, because the reward metrics for focusing on the client versus focusing on the end user are completely different between a product team and a services team. And the longevity of this kind of a relationship between the business teams versus the technology teams. In a product company, it's a lifetime relationship, but in a services, it is transactional. So coming back to the same analogy of hailing a taxi versus having your own mode of transport. So interestingly, in the product team, the driver of this vehicle can be any of them. It can be the business or it can be the technology team. You can say the technology team drives the business visions or business drives the technology team in the right direction. But in a services team, it's most probably the driver is the services company, which is providing a service for a certain amount of time and a certain amount of cost. And then so the clients always keep changing. You get different kinds of clients and then all those things that come along with it, right? So in this kind of a scenario, when we talk about a services company specifically, what has happened in the service world is since the early 2000s and all the noise and din that the agile movement has really made, everybody has really heard about agile. Yeah. So this agile process of software development has really brought about a significant shift in the client's expectations when they're trying to deal with a software service provider. So before this, agile was really the go-to thing to do. And when we had waterfall approaches, clients were very specific, or they were really aware about what kind of requirements they give and what is the duration for this project. So when do I pull the plug? When do I see certain outputs from the team? So there was some kind of an alignment in when this can happen. But now with this, there has been a significant shift wherein the client's expectation is that there should be some amount of continuous honoring of the requirement change. And then the release of features or the feature groups on demand, mainly because this ties back to the end user versus the client kind of a vision, wherein the clients have a better inkling of when do you want to release a feature. So they may want to park a certain features, and the services team may not really have a very good say in, no, let me release this feature or not. So putting in really crude terms, what this basically means is that the first point basically means I can change requirements whenever I want. That's one of the client expectation. And the second requirement is I want you to release the software whenever I ask you to. Right? So I call these two things as agility requirements, apart from all the other business related and the functional things that we try to do. So I want to go through this about how can we achieve this. What you also basically see here is when you're working with clients in the services industry, they are basically trying to control the input, and they want to have the full control of the output too. That's exactly what a client tries to do when they're trying to work with the services company. So I want to take a case study here, and then I want to say what things really helped us build in that agility that a services client really requires of somebody who is providing services. Right? So it's a specific use case, but it is a generic pattern too. Right? So this case study, let us say the client is a SaaS product company. So their end users are maybe web users, web scale product is what they want to build. And then they want many things to start being developed in parallel. So they want multiple smaller teams working on features in parallel. And because it is a newly built product, there are many things that overlaps. There are no real clear demarcations. And they still want a traditional stages of delivery with manual go, no-go calls between different environments. The QA is a real QA that happens, and the UAT is the real business users doing the UAT. And then, so in the industry that this client really works on, the market forces really moves the finished products to a parking lot, and this may not really be the right time to release those features. Right? So keeping these in mind, so we kept ourselves a few ground rules that helped us achieve it. One is delay the identification of a release candidate. So with all the processes that we have, the moment we say something becomes a release candidate and then we create a branch for it, so then it becomes cluttered, and you really cannot pick out features or smaller aspects of a release that you want to maybe give it a fast track, or you want that to be sent on a slower track, right? So it translates to a technology need of do not merge until necessary. Right? So allow for parallel development. So that means that a feature can really span lifetimes of multiple other features and not really be ready for development. So to make this happen, we brought in medium life branches and allow testing of these branches through environments on demand. So this happened to be a very critical implementation for us, which helped us achieve parallel development. Environment demand, on the next couple of visuals, I'll try to talk a little bit about it. And at the same time, even for the QA and UAT, so for me to really say a feature is complete and ready to go to the market, it also has to be QA and UAT done. So that means that just like how I allowed for parallel development in the development and the integration world, we also had to do the same thing for QA and UAT world too. And again, the same environment on demands really helped us do it. Do not release features immediately, finished features. There is a business, the market which says a go, no go, and there is our client services which also says go, no go. So we park all the finished items at medium lifetime branches. So from not to really bore you with details, but just for a couple of visualization about how this happened. At a source code level, we had long living branches for different environments or different stages of development. And feature development happened on their own feature development branches. And then instead of moving a release candidate from one stage to another stage, we kept moving features from one stage to another stage. And each feature was independently, completely tested and signed off at different stages of QA and UAT. But for us to really make it happen in parallel, so what you see is, especially when there are uncontrolled number of features that are really happening, so we cannot go back and say that, no, I don't have the space for it. I can only do 1 or 2 features and things like that. So we built environment on demand, wherein we can bring up the environment and release the environment whenever we need. So a new feature comes up on the development, a branching happens there, a trigger to the new environment happens, and an environment for development is ready. The similar thing happens on the QA2, and the similar thing happens on the UAT2. And a general thing that we have seen here is it follows some kind of a pyramid, wherein there are too many development environments for all the features that are going in. And then there are lesser number of QA environments, wherein only a few of them have really graduated to QA. And then there is much lesser environments when it comes to UAT. So at UAT, we tend to make it 1 or 2. At the max, it has gone till 3, but we have just kept it at that controllable level. But then that is all fine when we talk about a feature, and then when we say a feature is released to the end of it. But this slide is the most cluttered of it, trust me. And then I'll try to see how I can make sense out of this. So these features have been independently tested and independently signed off at different stages of development. But when we decide that there has to be a release candidate, and that release candidate starts to become the real golden code that we want. And at that point, a merge of these features happen. And nobody, dev or QA or UAT, has really tested a merged feature. So that's why we also need to do a merge release. And this merge release is an important aspect of this whole thing. Maybe the next slide will help us decide that. So we do a merge release, and on that merge release, maybe a few regression tests and maybe a few sanity tests, depending upon what kind of overlap we had in all the merges that we did. And then similarly, the merge release next go to the QA and then to the UAT. And then finally, when the merge release is really signed off, we do all the product release of it. So that means that now features are all developing in parallel, and whenever we decide these many features or a feature set becomes a release candidate, we do a merge testing of it. So from the client's perspective, the real measurable thing here is I had a merge release that required merge testing across different stages of our development. And now there is another merge release ready, and even that needs to go through different sets of requirements. Because at the production, it's just one code that needs to go there, right? So at some point, RC1 needs to get merged with the next release and things like that. So all these testing cycles that we spend for a release candidate, so that becomes a measurable activity. So we go back to the client and then we say that if I want release 1 and release 2, I think there's a typo here, it should have been release 2. So if I want release 1 and release 2, there is a set measured time between these releases, say maybe 10 days, wherein there is a 1 day of merge effort, 3 days of QA, 2 days of UAT, and then the resulting bug fix and some buffer time. And then we say there is a 10-day. So now, very interestingly, when we brought out this metric of, so between 2 release candidates, I at least need a 10-day, 15-day, whatever is the time frame, right? A 15-day time frame between these releases. Now it makes the client think, in this case, wherein I already have 20 features which are in the UAT parking lot ready to be released. But now the limiting factor of the bottleneck is the time between these 2 releases. And that's when the clients really understood why some money has to be spent on the automation testing. And we gave automation testing as a way to reduce this time between 2 releases. So the client with all the time was automation testing, I don't want to invest in automation testing because I expect the software to be good enough, now finds a need in this scenario wherein if I have to diminish the time between two releases, the only way to do that is reduce the testing cycles. And the only way to reduce the testing cycles is automate the critical paths, automate the regression testing. And there, that automation testing really helped this client to reduce the time between two releases. So at the end of it, as a conclusion, right? So these two things really helped us align ourselves with the agility requirements of the client. One is create and destroy environments on will. And the second is automate tests to decrease the time between releases. So for us, whenever we have clients and whenever the client comes with the technical requirements somehow gets done, and we also have some business requirements somehow gets done. But when we talk about identifying agility requirements of the client and then mapping it to the technical tasks have helped us really meet those requirements of the client. So this is one case study that I wanted to present from a services angle, wherein a lot of other things about the client really doesn't care about what is your velocity of the development team. Of course, those are inputs in planning, but still they really do not, or if I say that I need a spike to figure this out, so you have come in as technology experts who will help us solve this problem. So should I really be paying for the spike? My developers have to upskill themselves. Should I really be paying for the developers upskill? So all those things are very easily addressed in a product teams where the relationship is different between business and technology, and they will have to be addressed very differently in a services team. So it all boils down to just these two things. Right? And we see this as a pattern nowadays from one client to another client. And we think this kind of a thing has really helped us solve it. Okay, so at this point, I have reached the end of what I wanted to discuss. And over to you, Padma, back.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you very much. I think the case study was really a good one because it helped us understand what you actually mean a technical agility in a service organization. Thank you very much for that. We have a bunch of questions actually. What I'll start with is with the audience questions. That some couple are specific to each one of you, so I'll start with that. Vivek, I'll go with you first. I have a question from Suresh. Suresh Marur, how about your storage clusters for test and cloud? Are they also similar for test and prod? That's the question. Do you want more info, or is this good?
Yeah, it is good, I guess. Tell me if I'm not able to answer the question, but my answer is at this point it is the same. And when we grow bigger, right, we understand that this could be a scaling issue. And what we want to do is we want to mitigate this blow up by using the same storage cluster, same configuration of storage clusters for both test and prod, but with using feature flags so that you don't have to create multiple test environments, right? We can create a single test environment and try to test everything on that using feature flags rather than creating multiple test environments. So we hope that in future that will consolidate our cost towards the test environment even when we have the same configuration of storage clusters between test and prod. I'm not sure if I was clear. Did I answer your question, Suresh? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I think Padma, you're on mute. We're not able to hear you.
Can't hear you, Padma.
I'm so sorry. I don't know how that button got pressed. I'm so sorry. One second. I'll just read out the question. It's a little up. On configurable software, do you have any framework or products that help manage the configuration?
Okay, thanks. That's a very interesting question because configurable software now, especially when we are treating everything as software, right from infrastructure to the end of the code. So at what level of configuration we talk is really important. So a business requirement might be that I'm doing a big bang marketing now, and then maybe my user base will increase 5 times for the next 1 week, right? So at that point, we are really talking about configuration of the infrastructure, wherein can I really scale the infrastructure to meet that 5x demand? And that's where I say many infrastructure as code tools, Chef, Ansible, Kubernetes, Docker. So they help at various levels in maintaining this, and many of the elastic features that most of this cloud gives now. So that is one aspect of it. And the second aspect of it is when it comes to the product itself, there are many ways in which we can really do that. One is a database-driven configuration, wherein I want to turn on or turn off a feature at some point, or it can be IIT or localization, internationalization related configuration, which can be driven out of locale-based strings, or it can be about this error message that I am seeing on the screen now is conveying a wrong impression to the users, and I want to change it. So can any string that gets shown to the user, can I really make it configurable so that I can change the meaning on the run instead of going through a bug fix release cycle or a hotfix release cycle to make it happen, right? So configuration at different levels have different meanings, and I think now we are at a very wonderful stage of software development wherein you ask me, can this be configured? Yes, it can be configured. Is it worth the time and money? That is the question that the business will have to answer. All right. So yeah, that's an interesting question. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. I have a question. Actually, it's for both of you, so it will be good if one of you start and the other one can follow. So this is a very fundamental doubt I've always had, right? Is technical agility is a prefix for business agility? So business agility follows if you follow technical agility or if you build technical agility, or do you first foresee business agility, what you want there, and then start building your technical agility to suit that? Is this a linear process or is this a parallel, you do it together? It's very confusing. I think not just me, I think a lot of confusion even in the otherwise audience market. So one of you could start and the other one can add on to that.
So I think Ganesh, you're talking, but on mute.
No, I was thinking maybe alphabetic order this time.
All right, yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that maybe. Yes, Padma, basically, I mean, I always look at it as the business should be the one who drives this agility requirements. So depending on what kind of a customer base they are dealing with. Right? So if the customer base is a healthcare customers, or if it's banking needs, or if it is general web scale application, so then the agility requirements at all these things are very, very different. So for a healthcare, they're okay not to release a software, but release a software and cause health risks to someone, right? On banking, similarly, might be a little lesser than healthcare. I mean, if at all we rate health higher than finances. But even at a banking, it is okay for us to push the release by a week, but I don't want to introduce an extra click to one of our clients, right? I mean, this really happened to us, wherein we were woken up in the middle of the night because this guy was dealing with a trading platform. We introduced a couple of clicks extra, and then he said, I approve billions of transactions every day, and I cannot keep clicking it twice, right? So then it becomes like, okay, the agility can really be withheld a little. But I'm dealing with web scale software wherein my users are really spread across the world. And then who defines the agility there, right? Especially in a web scale kind of a product wherein I want to release direct to customer, and I want to really do fixes direct to customer, release beta features direct to customers. Then it is really good if both technology team, primarily driven by technology, and then the business team really picks that up to drive agility there. But all other business scenarios, I mostly think it's the business which will set the ground rules for what agility means in terms of technical agility, basically.
Okay. So according to me, to answer the question of what do you start with, it makes sense to be intentional about technical agility from the start. But the idea is also to change what all things you do for technical agility. Uh, the metrics for that will be, is the business agile or not? You can do a lot of things for technical agility, but unless business is able to get some benefit from it and you are able to objectively prove to yourself that whatever you are doing is right, you cannot say, okay, our technical agility stops here. So what I would propose is start with technical agility intentionally, because that's a logical step to business agility. But again, keep changing whatever you are doing for technical agility as and when you know something about whether business is able to take your changes and put it on, business is able to adapt, according, and are you serving the business in order to change or not? So it's like start with technology and then keep adapting based on what the business gives you. That's my mental model of this question.
Perfect. Actually, that brings me to another question, as you say, and I was also reading through your slides, both your slides. You said NFR as metrics, right, in one of the slides, and that's very interesting because anyway, I was wanting to ask a question on metrics because Vivek also recently co-authored a metrics book. So I will start with Vivek and then Aditya from the service side, you could tell. Now, so what metrics do you think, like top 3 or top 5, that helps you say, hey, I am in the kind of right direction? See, ultimately only market tells you whether you are in the right direction or not. But still, like until we get to the market, what helps you to see that you are in the right direction?
In terms of technical agility?
In terms of technical agility, which you think will also help build my business agility.
Understood. So one golden metric that always is in my mind is the lead time. So there are lead time is typically the time between when it starts becoming a concept, or at least a mature concept, to where it becomes cash, right? Concept to cash is another term that they use for it. So is my lead time tolerable for my business needs, right? Average lead time for multiple features. So there are multiple ways in which you can use it to improve your ways of work also. But yes, lead time is one key metric for me, right? As to whether whenever I think about some new change, how long does it take for it to become a reality? And that is one key metric for me. And of course the second key metric for me is, okay, we have put changes in on prod, but what is the quality impact of it, right? These two things. So I would rather take NPS and try to get a technical agility angle of it whenever there is a quality aspect in the NPS, plus lead time as a raw number, or at least as an aggregated number. These two are the metrics in my head.
Makes sense. Aditya, from a service provider system integrator side, what metrics do you think as a technology head of Arita? Also, you will have some of them. So can you share?
Yeah. So at that point, for me, in managing a services team, a technical team, so it all boils down to the software quality metrics about what kind of bugs, because every wasted every test cycle is considered as we introduced that test cycle because the development team was not able to do it right the first time, right? So every test cycle is looked at as a cost implication to the client. So the quality metrics becomes a very important metric. And then I agree on the lead to market metric from concept to cash that Vivek told. So that also is something about that helps for us a lot in whenever we have a fixed cost project wherein so there are many different ways of projects, fixed costs or time and money, manage T&M. So if it's a fixed cost project, I will want to accelerate it as much as possible so that and really safeguard a scope creep so that I can really meet those business requirements also from a services company perspective, right? So that becomes a very important metrics for me too. Yeah.
Completely makes sense. Aditya, I had a question, and in fact, one of our audience, Prashant, has made a similar observation. In B2B, we end up considering clients and end users' requirements, right? So I think it's probably kind of relevant for NoteSally also, Vivek, but I'll start with Aditya here, especially in a very heterogeneous B2B space that they are in. You work with clients day in and day out, and they are heterogeneous. What helps you identify with your clients? What are they looking for from your service? And how do you focus on technical agility that helps your clients build a business agility? Because here there is like
Yeah.
you provide some technical services, but that need to help them build their business agility.
Yeah.
How does
No,
that happen in your
yes,
service
yes,
space?
that's exactly correct. The key word here is being heterogeneous clients, right? So yeah, we find clients of all different shapes and sizes throughout, and then so the true agility from a services angle, what is required is uh, the process agility is what I would say, in the sense that uh, at many a times clients approach us on a consultative mode, wherein tell us the best way to do it and we will do it, right? So then I can say, okay, these are the different steps that you need to do for arriving at a very good software that you can really salvage something out of it. But many a times the requirements will be such that I really cannot impose my processes on the clients. A case in point that we are right now doing is, so we have a client who is getting some POCs done to really put it in front of investors and put it in front of his team, and there it's a lot more quicker in terms of he directly interacts with the developers, gets it done, and we release it directly to a staging environment where he quickly sees something happening there. As again, so there I cannot really bring in different stages telling that, no, before I give it to you, let me run it through a QA cycle and then I give it to you. And so even though that multiple releases parallel development might have worked for one client for me, I cannot take the same process here and adapt the same process to a different client. So for me there, the biggest thing is the process agility is the biggest that I can bring in so that I can meet different requirements. And more interestingly, that B2B products, considering both client and the user requirements, yes, but still, the degrees in which what I feel is a product company looks at a end user requirement versus a services company looks at will be a little different. In the services industry, during the technology design and during the requirement collection, there is a very high uh, 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 link with the business about what are the end user requirements, and that alignment is very, very necessary. And it is important for this team which is interfacing with the client to take the same user needs and translate it down to the development team that is there. Many a times the development team will not have a direct interface with the customer to really understand the end user. So there, that role of that interfacing team becomes very, very important to paraphrase and convey the same message that the business has. That is always a challenge in services industry. We jump between projects, we jump between clients, we jump between industries. So then how do we make our developers think the user angle becomes a very challenging thing for the interfacing team, basically.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for a detailed perspective on that. Vivek, I'll change the question a little bit. You too will have a heterogeneous industries coming to you for your product, using them. And one of the things in a product, especially, is you have a lot of assumptions, right? Your entire product is built on a set of assumptions, and do some hypothesis testing that helps you to move there.
Yeah.
How important do you think hypothesis kind of acts in building not only your product agility, but in terms of your overall end business game as well?
It is the key. It is very important thing. The most important thing is approaching whatever we are doing as hypothesis in a way. Even if you look at NoteSally, right, NoteSally is currently validating the hypothesis that NoteSally is a viable business, right? And that's what we are validating at this point in time. And there are some sub hypotheses around that, right? For example, this particular feature where there is an AI assistant is going to be used by these customers, used by at least 10% of the users in next 1 month, right? And that is a hypothesis. And to me, hypothesis testing actually brings you down from your own assumptions by acknowledging that they are assumptions and they need to be tested. And hypothesis testing puts me in a mode where I can change if I need to. And my mindset is also, a reflection of probably the agile community that I have been interacting with, possibly, and business agility meetups and all. But hypothesis testing is the most important thing that we have to do. We approach everything as hypothesis, actually, when at least in a startup. So to me, it's very important. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. In the interest of time, I'll probably pick up one last question from the audience. And I'll probably go with maybe Vivek this time and Aditya to kind of summarize. So what are the technical implementation challenges, lessons learned in achieving business agility?
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll try to take a top two thing rather than telling everything. So most of the things that I presented were based on some lessons we learned. So before we started Notesli, my team was working on a face recognition product called FaceQuest, and a lot of challenges that we faced are not directly traceable to technology, but yes, they are very specific. So one of the challenge is about particularly technical implementation challenges are when you run on a, let's say, environment, cloud environment, particularly serverless environment. One challenge is how do you optimize the startup time of the API so that your API calls are very fast, and that was a big challenge for us. And we came up with our own ways of making sure, very nitpicky about the startup times of any service that we start. And that is one technical implementation challenge that we went through, and we are avoiding a lot of things that we did in FaceQuest, the challenges to the current product Notes Alive. That is one. So the idea is to be very nitpicky about startup times. Otherwise, your business, the users are going to see your software as extremely sluggish, even though you run on very high, what do you say, high cost and very shiny cloud infrastructure. That is one. And the second top learning that I had was that um, technology and business, right? So many a times they may not be able to go hand in hand. Sometimes when you are looking at features that the business cannot even think of at this point in time. For example, a user may not think how an AI assistant can help them in selling. Right now, in that case, technology has to take the lead and show the possibilities rather than going into our mindset of, okay, hey, you know what, let the people who are talking to users come back and tell us. Sometimes user may not even know what your product you're building. So in that case, having a mechanism where you can also drive product led or technology led features versus user led or user requested features. We need to have two separate tracks and two separate ways of dealing with and validating these two areas. And this was not there in our previous what do you say product. And this is a second implementation what do you say challenge or lessons that we learned based on our recent journey.
Yeah, I can so identify. I think the entire startup is built on a lessons learned foundation, I guess, right? And sometimes very tough and expensive lessons also.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Aditya, could you help us summarize this and maybe we can bring the session
for
to a
me,
close?
yeah, that's an interesting question about the actual implementation of technology to align with it, right? So for me, I find two main things. One is there are no established patterns in how we bring about technical agility. There have been many tools which have bombarded the technology landscape. So from Docker, Kubernetes, Ansible, Chef Puppet to scalable clouds and microservices and too many things. So while figuring out a pattern becomes an important thing to achieving that technical implementation, the second thing is the whole learning curve that a team needs to go through is also pretty high in terms of today's technology landscape with all the ease of use and all the parallel things that we build. So the tech stack so very diverges between one company to another company that if I have to bring in a technologist into my team, the divergence is too high, right? So the tool sets or all the things that they might have a very good technology agility built in through many of these processes. But once that person comes into my company, that engineer comes into my company, can I really take that usage? Maybe not, because my technology stack is completely different. And it's also very overwhelming for anybody to start picking up all these technologies. So maybe a couple of years down the line, we will see much higher wrappers at a much higher level, wherein we don't need to go into the nitty-gritties of each of these tools. And it becomes very easy self-serve tools. But these two things, no patterns and the learning curve, is the biggest hindrance in saying my technical team can't be as agile as the business wants it to be.
Perfect. Yeah, makes sense. We have actually quite a few questions, and I myself personally have a lot of questions in terms of what Aditya spoke about, merge only when necessary. And when we have a metric like how many times did you merge in a day, and then you are talking about with someone Aditya who is saying merge when necessary or remote coding. Lot of questions, but in the interest of time and given that it's a Saturday afternoon, we don't want to have our attendees, our participants spend more time here. So thank you for a wonderful Saturday morning. Wishing you a very, very happy weekend for the rest of the time from now onwards, and enjoy. So thank you very much, Vivek and Aditya, for coming out on a Saturday, helping us understand some new concepts and sharing your experience and your knowledge. Thank you very much.
Definitely, it was great. Thanks a lot, Padma. Thanks everybody who attended. Thanks, Vivek.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all. And on the chat window, I have posted the link of our newly launched LinkedIn page. Please follow us on LinkedIn. And we have the YouTube channel on which we have posted our past events. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I already see some appreciations flowing in on the chat window. Please also share what topics of your interest would you like to like to see in BAM Bangalore in the coming months, and share topics of your interest with us, and we'll definitely be very happy to take them up in the upcoming months. So thank you all once again for your warm words that's flowing in. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you again in the next gathering of BAM Bangalore. Have a wonderful weekend.